So I think we've had a real experience of reality today, haven't we, with everybody's technology. So as I was saying, I feel like the pastry chef today, because I feel like that's the person that's got to deliver the good memory to leave the restaurant with. And we've had some fantastic speakers, and I've been able to listen in to everybody's contribution today. And I'm sure you're all feeling as empowered and uplifted and impressed as I am. So I hope that by the end of the afternoon, you still are feeling that way, and that we've had some positive experiences and interactions. So I'm going to start off by thinking about, what does technology sort of impact in terms of transitions? And transitions is such a kind of overarching term, but when you think about all the speakers that have contributed today, every one of them has really alluded to or referred directly to the experience of transitions, and the fact that actually they are an inevitable part of life. So we're going to look at them in a bit more detail during the course of our time together. And I thought one of the kind of helpful ways to start would be to hit technology itself. And so I spoke to ChatGPT and thought, right, let's ask ChatGPT what they think about transitions, or what it thinks about transitions. So I asked it, what are transitions? And ChatGPT told me that transitions are using heroes of any presentation, the unsung heroes, sorry, in any presentation. They guide your audience smoothly from one idea to the next, creating a seamless flow, whether it's logical progression or a captivating story. Transitions keep things engaging. So I thought, right, no pressure on me then. I better work on that. Especially when later on we're going to be transitioning out of PowerPoint, out of technology, to a more of a real life demonstration. And I'll explain why in a moment. So then I thought, well, okay, then let's ask, what about coping with transitions when you are autistic? So here was ChatGPT's response. Navigating transitions can be challenging, especially for those on the autism spectrum. Establishing clear routines, providing advance notice, and offering sensory support can be helpful. Understanding individual need and creating supportive environments fosters a smoother transition experience. Wow, I thought, yep, that sounds like sound advice. You can understand where everybody's fears of job loss are coming from when we're thinking about these evolving technological worlds. So what has ChatGPT got to say when I'm asking about transitioning away from using technology? Well, again, some good points. Stepping back requires a gradual approach, setting designated tech-free time, embracing hobbies and outdoor activities, making real-world connections. We've heard that mentioned earlier today, the importance of the real, the importance of experience, the importance of communication. So I was sort of left thinking, well, we're sort of on the same page here. So what do we need other than technology? And of course, the answer sort of does lie there, that actually in this point, when we ask about feelings, ChatGPT, as in technology, tells us, I don't have feelings, but I can help you with anything related to ending a computer game. Are you looking for assistance with a specific game, or have a general question? And I thought, that's it, isn't it? That's where our gap, thankfully, in a way, remains. And the fact that actually what we really need is human connection to support us through having positive learning experiences through our technology, to support us transitioning in and out of those experiences, and think about how we can use those positive transitions for understanding our environment, understanding the world we're in, understanding ourselves, all of which have been talked about and alluded to during the course of today. And of course, feelings associated with this word transition are often very big, because when you're transitioning, it's likely to be a choice, or maybe a must, perhaps a response, or sometimes even an instinct, like we were just hearing about. So in a way, transitions are multidimensional. And so if you're looking at the slides, you'll notice that you just transitioned through these three types of text, probably almost subconsciously. You perhaps didn't give it a thought. You might have noticed I've changed the font and the style, perhaps not really known why. And what I didn't explain was that those things had changed, and yet you probably still scan read the information that was there. So we're tuning in, as this little boy is tuning in that picture there. So we're tuning in to what is automatically put in front of us. We're transitioning that smoothly, that unplanned, that automatically. And so that extent of processing skills we ease thoughtlessly through are a mere tip of the iceberg. For many neurodiverse individuals, they not only notice style and colour change, but they notice the detail. And they can notice the detail much more skillfully than perhaps many neurotypical people are able to do. And if you think about this slide here, I wonder how many of us actually notice the change in detail of that letter A in the different texts. Only in the first text is the letter A as we would describe it were we writing a note or a letter. Although admittedly, I've worked with a number of children who will take on a font that they have worked with on their computers and form the letters accurately and perfectly to the font that they have been reading. But not many typically progressive learners would go through that process. So therefore, it appears that actually for us, these transitions are sometimes instinctive, but sometimes they are very planned transitions. And sometimes we can think about transitions that are challenging in a kind of physical way. I know I worked for quite a long time with a young person who found it incredibly difficult to literally transition across the road, to step down from the curb and get to the other side, and their anxiety would take over, and that would really put a stopper on that very sort of physical transition. And when we think about those, and you know, the little person would curl up in a ball and sort of stop in the middle of the road because of that fear. And when you think of transitional fear, it can really put these stops on our experiences. I know another gentleman who would press along the wall or the fence if traffic was within, you know, probably barely hearing distance or visual distance for the majority of us. And his mum shared that it used to take him 15 minutes to, at least a minimum of 15 minutes to get down the stairs. So those sorts of transitions can be really inhibited by fear and anxiety. And those anxieties, of course, can be social or sensory. And it's such of that missing bits of knowledge, isn't it? Those bits of information that we perhaps just know, but that don't necessarily get carried along the way for many non-neurotypical children, for many neurodiverse children. And so I think one of the support strategies that we can use to sort of guide through some of these transitions and looking at some of the ways that we can support them is to, first of all, think about our own awareness and our own knowledge of where those transitional gaps lie for our children. And I think that the lens of transition, that perspective, where that lies for many of our children, the difficulty of transitions is in that gap. And I often think, you know, that's the bit that we need to mind. We need to mind the gap, because that's the most scary place. That's the bit that is the and. That's the bit that's the next. It's an empty pause between one fixed state and another fixed state. And so often the gap, that moment, that space is what we are engaging with. It's what we kind of think of as our automatic movement forward into the next thing. But obviously for some neurodiverse individuals, that can be their scary place, that can be their most challenging place. And for those living and loving neurodiversity, I think we have to accept that we've got a really important responsibility to approach these gaps, to be aware when we approach them of time and development and maturity, which may change for some, but also be aware of the worries for many of these children, and also the expectations and the understanding of those expectations, the understanding of the consequences of those expectations. And, you know, we've heard that alluded to and mentioned already today when we were listening this morning to Colin talking about the reality and the importance of communication and connection. And then Alison mentioned the importance of experience, talking about her experience of, you know, exposing people to restaurants and those sorts of experiences, that real experience. And Tony's just been talking to us about the importance of kids understanding consequences of their actions, the consequences of their feelings, and how they can manage those. So transitions are an inevitable part of our entire development. And I feel very empowered, I felt very empowered by a dad who actually was sort of saying what Tony was saying earlier. And he's the dad of a 14-year-old that I had the privilege of meeting in the Northwest recently. And he mentioned that the importance of being brave and bold enough to have awkward conversations, and that he felt to be honest and factual and open about topics when they arise is the most important thing. And I think I can only really reflect that, and I think Tony certainly put that out there as well. And when you think that we have got technology at our fingertips, and so if we don't know how or why a situation is, then the wonderful thing of technology is that we can often Google it, so we can fill in that social knowledge or cultural information gap with the facts and information that we might need our youngsters to be aware of. So why is someone wearing a certain item of clothing? Because it's part of their culture. Why is someone eating certain foods or speaking in a certain way? Why is someone needing to use a wheelchair? So that we're really addressing those transitional cultural experiences in a very matter-of-fact, very informative sort of way, which of course really buys in to our children's best way of learning. And of course, with many of our children's peers, they're sort of keeping pace or trying to keep pace with them couldn't be easier in terms of accessing information on the computer. But of course, for our kids, they also have sometimes that wonderful memory. And I know, you know, they can be very astute at scooting around security, and I know very young children who know all the passwords and all the codes onto every phone in the family. And I know one little boy who once sent to the primary school office, then used the secretary's login that he'd spotted through the reflection of the glass to get into the computer. Now, of course, he's not being malicious, he's just wanting to know. And he also didn't know that that's not okay. So for our kids transitioning in a changing world, does expose risks and gaps, and we've heard that word vulnerability mentioned a number of times today. And I think it's just so important that we are, when we can be, a step ahead where possible and offer factual, calm, truthful realities, really. And I think that's a really healthy sort of aim for us to have. So in terms of experiences, many of our children are experiencing video games, and that whole arena of sort of what these games are offering, and the challenges sometimes for many of our children in experiencing reality and fiction, and differentiating and discerning between those two things can be really difficult. And I know one boy who believed he could you know, identify as respawn was his first thing, that he thought that if he died he could respawn, which of course, you know, in the mental health arena is a very worrying perspective. And also he would identify as a character from a game that he played, but 100% of the time. So then his friends would call him weird, and then he would wonder, well, what's weird, and is that something I want to be or something I don't want to be? And so all of these experiences can then put our children into their sort of red alert. So I think one gap may be worth considering is this gap of social understanding. Is it real? Is it fiction? Is it serious? Is it a joke? And they may leave us in a confused state, let alone our children. But when we get anxious about something being wrong or being misinterpreted in a situation all of the time, then as Thomas Armstrong in his book, The Power of Neurodiversity, he highlights the danger of remaining in an unhealthy state of alert due to our transitional lens being insufficient in its adaptation. And I like that perspective. I like that idea of a transitional lens, because that is what we're looking through, isn't it? You know, there's that picture of that little boy in his virtual reality game, but really, you know, without the mask on, inside of his brain is that transitional lens that he's trying to adapt and trying to cope with, and trying to decode his real experiences as well as that VR experience. And so for many of our children, starting and finishing, breaking off, maybe a favorite game, these are all common points that you've raised and that you've shared that actually demand that adaptation. And an 11-year-old actually told me once that he was certain that there were games that he just can't play on his PC. And I was curious as to sort of where he'd kind of come to that from. I was thinking, oh, had his parents told him there's things he's not to play, or things that he should avoid, or he's been blocked out of, or whatever. And of course, you know, as we often do, we try and decode non-neurotypical behaviour from perhaps our own experience, whether neurotypical or not, but we try and decode it in a sort of sense, in a way that makes sense to us. So I was thinking that all of those things, but actually it turned out that he told me that he can't stand the feelings that happen when he loses a level, and so he couldn't take the risk. And I think that's a really valuable thing to know about, because those are the kinds of experiences, those are the kinds of feelings that we do need to learn to understand. We do need to learn to process, because taking risk and experiencing failure are part of our adult world. And Alison was talking about the importance of those experiences and the knowledge of what's ahead in our adult world, and how wonderful it is to start and expose our children to those opportunities so early on. And I think there's also hand in hand with that, the importance of the opportunities to understand those feelings, because a lone virtual reality game is not going to necessarily teach us about coping with those feelings. And so I think it's important that we acknowledge that actually maybe that's where ChatGPT is not going to be of any help to us at all. And so I think one of the things to consider when we are considering gaming and playing on computer games and accessing iPads is to first of all make a plan, to be realistic, to discuss some of these possibilities about feelings, about the context of the game. And I think importantly, to join in the fun, to accept that actually many of our children really do value and love and get a lot from their gaming, from the opportunities of gaming, and it can open up interaction opportunities with their peers and with other people. And I think, you know, Colin very positively outlined where those safety nets need to be in terms of exposure, and the fact that for our young children under 13 not having that exposure to the big social world web is really important. And so when we're thinking of developmental stage for our children, I think that's even more important. And so I think it's a good idea, and my experience has shown me that this is one of the ways that can help this process to be a little bit more smooth, is to put that plan in place. And you can see there that little planning bag at the top. This little boy has written down some ideas that he could do after his time on his gaming on his PlayStation. And I put a bridge in there because this is where we want to build a bridge for the transitional experience. So this is our kind of transitional tool, really, is to put in some bridges. So one of our tools is to make a plan and to think about, right, what can we do? What is the next opportunity after this game, so that we're making that finishing and starting experience a little bit more gentle. So then how do we affect the timing? Because timing is another thing that transitions in life throw at us, time and chunks of time and working through time and processing time. And I've worked with many families who will say things like, oh, I can't set a timer, he can't stand the tick, or he's alarmed by the alarm, or he may get completely focused on watching the oil or the sand drip through and then gets upset because he's missed time on his game, or it's taken his attention from his game or her game. And so one of the more gentle ways of passing the time that I've had success with is to make something like a little paper chain, and we'll look at some other transitional tools in a moment when we break off PowerPoint. And so one of the ways is to do a little paper chain, like the example here, and that can be a countdown, so you can rip off a little ring every 5 minutes for your child, so that they can see physically that their time on their PlayStation or on their iPad is passing by. And that sort of bridges that idea then of coping with that start to finish. But then it's really important that we bridge from that end into using and choosing from their plan, from that little ideas sack that you might have put together before their 25, 30 minutes or whatever is your agreed time on the PlayStation or on the activity. So what we want to do is make the whole experience very cyclic, so that the whole focus is not on getting on my game or getting off my game, that actually PlayStation experiences and all of those experiences are all part of what's going on in the rest of the day. So I think we're going to learn from some of the experiences from other families. So I'm going to just stop sharing now, and I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Hopefully it won't stop sharing. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and hopefully you'll be able to see some of the processes that families have found helpful to support them in this whole transitional experience. So some of the processes that families have shared with me that have been really helpful to them have been doing things, a physical visual countdown. So it might be, if your little one's into squishmallows, that you literally are just taking pieces of the face either along, because sometimes building up rather than building down can be a much more positive approach. So that's just a very simple way of doing a timed build down or build up. And of course that's fine for a little one, but then you might be thinking, well, that's great for, you know, a 3-year-old or maybe a 6-year-old or 7-year-old that's still into squishmallows, but what about my 15-year-old or my older child? So, or my 18 plus young person who's still having lots of concerns about transitioning. So I'm not suggesting we start encouraging underage drinking, but I'm just showing this as an example of where we can go with these processes, that when we are talking about using these ideas sacks, timers, bridging these experiences, that we're not suggesting that you can only do that when you're little, or you can only put that in place when you're a certain age. What I'm trying to market here is the fact that we can be transitional in our approaches, in our processes. So it might be that we transition into a more sort of grown-up way of that countdown and using a piece of a puzzle. And actually this piece of a puzzle was used to support a gentleman with autism and learning disabilities, and it helped him to get out of his residential care setting after COVID, because he got, for each 100 paces he did, he got a piece of his puzzle. And that sounds horrendous, to be counting to 100 11 times, but for him that was a really positive, reassuring way of having that transition experience, and the experience to transition in that way, with that distraction, with that encouragement, with that reminder that he was going to the pub, which was what he loved to do, then that really was positive for him. Now, of course, all of that can be diluted down to be age appropriate for our individual children and stage appropriate for our individual children. So that's why I've jumped from a squishmallow example to a beer can, because I want to try and really emphasize that real sort of broad transition that can happen. And another way that that can happen is that we've usually gone through a process similar to this. So it may be that actually we started off giving a very clear sort of object. We may have moved on to a photograph, and then sometimes we've moved on to a symbol picture. But all of these things need to be supported. We need to bridge them. We can't just put transitional tools in place and expect our children to roll with them. And the little one who I alluded to earlier about crossing the road, this transitional tool worked for them. So this was literally a photographic transitional tool, where we had to do step down from the curb and then cross the road for counting 20, then step up from the curb, and then, sorry, you can see here we've got the little picture there of the reward that's coming, and that's the ice pop. And I'm sure you can guess why it is that we just did a picture separate there of a finger choosing one ice pop, because sometimes when we are offering these rewards and offering these experiences, we need to be very clear in what it is that is available. And so this transitional tool using visuals really did help to move on for this child. And as you can see, the final visual was drawing, because that was something that he absolutely loved to do, and he knew he did when he was safely across of the road. And then he moved on when he was much older to using more symbols and just little reminders that on a little keyring, as you can see there, that he could just have in his pocket should he want to remind himself of that transitional experience, which had been blocked previously by that real fear that we talked about earlier. And then, of course, one of the ways that we can get stuck and not able to transition is by that difficulty in making a choice. And so I often work with families who will say, well, I've asked him what he wanted and he said he wanted to do this and now he won't do it, or now he can't access it. And I was watching a child recently making a choice from a cupboard that had games stacked one box on top of another. And I thought it was very interesting watching him trying to work out where one game box ended and another one started. And it really opened my eyes. It was a bit of a revelation, to be honest, because I haven't really, I think, allowed or processed that experience. And I kind of realized that he couldn't see the differentiation in the boxes because he could see so much detail around the boxes. And so we made this map, and this is a map of the games that were available. And he could detour from the map and go and lay on the floor, which is what he loves doing. He's got a underfloor heating at home, which his parents tend to keep on all the time, because he loves to go and lay on the wooden floor. And so he could then choose his games, and we cut them up and put them out just separately like this, so that then he could just put them, you know, along that little map. He could choose them much more easily than they're just photographs of the games. So, you know, what's up and those sorts of activities, a puzzle, and then various other games, dominoes. And so he could just choose those and put them on his little map, and he would walk through choosing which game to play. And so that very visual way helped him with transitions. But then this little boy has ADHD and autism, and he gets very bored very easily. So he then went to using colour sticks. And so he put a sticker onto the boxes in the cupboard, and he decided to choose by colour. And of course, that's part of the responsibility in terms of adults working with our children to support them in their transitional experiences and making that a positive transitional experience. It may be that for many of our children, we need to be the ones that are sort of making that move towards helping them visually and physically decide on their transitional experiences. And so hopefully you can see my screen here as I just round up on our final slide. And hopefully you can see there again a few more ideas and transitional tools, and the fact that actually 100% of parents, when I asked the families that I work with, I really want to thank them, I'm very indebted, and they were wonderful. I emailed them out to just kind of check in on what's happening for them in terms of supporting their children transitioning. And these are the kinds of things that they told me, the things that I've shown you, but they also told me that they do a final physical countdown, that some families just literally unplug and say, that's it, it's finished. And they've got a little girl who can take that. She's cool with that. And then this little girl at the bottom here, Polly, she moves up a step every 5 minutes, and she places that little green, she places a start card on one step and a stop card on 4 steps further on. Or sometimes she places a start card at the top and a finish card a little bit further down. And so she's manipulating her environment and her need for movement and engagement while she's concentrating. She wants to be knowing that she's moving around. She can't deal with timers. She finds those very stressful at the moment. And so that's a good way as well of introducing a positive experience of the time passing. And then also some families told me that they just literally throw a sheet over the computer and put the computer to bed. And I know many years ago when I was working with a family over in Yorkshire, and they had a giant doll's house in their little boy's bedroom, and his very favourite thing was wandering around the buildings in York, and he would love to reenact and play out all the historical experiences using this doll's house. And he would get up in the middle of the night or play at all times of day. And actually they had a very small house and there was really nowhere else for this game to go. But Mum said that after some discussion we tried putting a sheet over it and saying that the house had gone to bed. And of course, you know, for many of our children with literal understanding, he was very happy for that to happen, and he never got up and played with the house in the night again until Mummy said the house had got up. And so sometimes, again, I think buying into and engaging with those different neurodivergencies that our children operate with and working with them can really work to our advantage. And of course, some people mentioned digital timers, scheduling in game time, but as I say, 100% of you said that we never just tell them anymore, we show. And I think when we think what we've learned today and all of the experiences that we've had today, it's been really great to hear and see people's perspectives and people's stories and experiences. And without exception, every single one of our speakers today has made reference and used to help us make bridges and links between experience and theory. And that is a really valuable, important thing when we are trying to make sure that we mind the gap and we fill in those gaps for our children. So hopefully you've heard or seen some ideas that might help you to approach those transitional gaps that our children's developmental stages and maturation and experiences sometimes do expose. So thank you everybody for listening and for hanging on in there this afternoon.
That was great. Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. What a brilliant presentation. We've had a few questions coming in, so we'll try and get through as many as we can. The first one is, do you have any strategies for supporting children with general self-care, i.e. brushing teeth, getting changed, having breakfast? I've tried a visual calendar, but this technique hasn't seemed to have landed with my daughter.
And sometimes I think a visual calendar can be a little bit overwhelming, and so it might be better to break things down a bit and offer more of a key ring approach, because there's just one job at once. If it's something that actually doesn't need to be done in a certain order, then using that bag idea, more of a lucky dip, which makes it a bit more fun. So, you know, having a get dressed, clean your teeth, I go to the toilet in a lucky dip, because it doesn't really matter what way round that happens. Then if there's that flexibility, that can be helpful, particularly for children who've perhaps got more of a PDA profile, where that's that avoidant way of working and understanding the world. So a lot of anxiety promotes them in avoidance, but it's really rooted in anxiety. So anything we can do that can make things feel less pressured and fun and engaging can be helping with those transitions, but also putting out some facts that actually the reason we need to operate self-hygiene, I've had a very positive result from explaining body lice to children, which I know sounds incredibly extreme, but actually sometimes, putting out the real truth. And I know Tony talked about that, the importance of putting out real facts and being factual and saying it as it is. And that is the reality. We don't just wash ourselves for the fun of it. There is good reason behind it. I hope that helps.
Yeah, brilliant. I lost my mouse there, so I couldn't get to you in time.
Don't worry.
Next question is there any real chance of improvement in the process of transition to adulthood for our young people? There seems to be no role to, quote, project manage all of the changes that take place in terms of social care, education, health, etc. One parent I know described it as falling off a cliff in terms of support.
I think in terms, if we're talking about services, then I think we are in a difficult situation. But if we're talking about what we can do ourselves as parents and as educators and as those who love and cherish our children, then there's lots we can do. And I sometimes think, we are better pouring our energies into all that we can do on that level, and then yes, working with the services that are available, which are not fluid and not easy. And I know I'm supporting a family at the moment who are desperately trying to get appropriate provision for their son, and so I really do appreciate the challenges and the difficulties, but there's not an easy answer. But I hate to feel that people feel like they're falling off a cliff, because that shouldn't be the situation. There are people out there. Find our tribe, join a support group, go to .gov.uk, find out what services are available. The National Autistic Society have a register of available support for parent partnership support. So, please do reach out. Don't feel that you are falling off a cliff.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Next question is, how could I help my child transition from primary school to secondary? I'm worried about the shock to the system from going from such a nurturing environment into the chaos of high school. She's in a mainstream school and would really love her to continue in mainstream education as much as possible.
Okay, I'm rooting around here for a very good reason, because somewhere I have a book which is called Mind the Gap, surprisingly enough. And if you email in, I'll be able to email the link out, but it's a really good book in supporting our children through that whole transitional period. But I think also adopting the golden rules of familiarising, which is really important. So doing lots more visits than perhaps school would ordinarily advocate. Doing as much understanding and practicing as you can beforehand. So making sure that things like bags and pencil cases and how all that's planners, how they all operate, and starting to use a planner if that's not something that's familiar, so that we can make as much of that experience already familiar for our children. So almost playing school, as young children do, it's almost kind of taking those skills and thinking, how can we practice them in that sort of safe environment, so that we're going to high school equipped with as much knowledge about that experience as we possibly can. I know families who have practiced with the credit card canteen system by getting a little Henry card, or a child's account card, and getting them to go along and pay. And then if their brother has said, oh, could you buy me a milkshake, practicing saying, no, I'm not allowed to buy a milkshake for you, this is my dinner money. So that we're having those experiences, those social experiences, not for the first time when all the other things feel strange at high school. So familiarity is definitely one of the most key factors. I hope that helps. It's very difficult in this situation.